Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here this morning. I apologize again for the late start to our proceedings today. But when we concluded yesterday, we had finished with the examination of the Ministry for District Administration, Tourism and Transport. And so this morning, in accordance with our schedule, we are going to begin with the Ministry of Financial Services and Home Affairs. What page is that? I would like to acknowledge the presence of Year 4 students from the Bodden Town Primary School who are in the gallery this morning to observe the proceedings of the Finance Committee. And we welcome them and their teachers and hope that they'll stay with us, and watching the proceedings will be productive, that they will learn something about the conduct of government in their country. So welcome to them. We're going to begin this morning with the Minister for Financial Services and Home Affairs. That is found on page 24 of your document. The first item up for examination is FSC 20, Delivery of Enhanced Public Safety and National Security Services, $2,825,927 in 2020 and $3,124,174 in 2021. Are there any questions? Member for Northside.
Just one minor question. Why is the Minister of Finance limiting the number of responses, number of parliamentary questions and private members' motion to 6?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I think that's just the kind of average based on the probably historical data. I don't think there's any limit per se. Whatever questions come, we'll answer.
There are no further questions. All in favor of FSC 20, Delivery of Enhanced Public Safety and National Security Services for $2,825,927 in 2020 and $3,124,174 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. FSC 21, Framework for a Modern Innovative Financial Services Industry, $2,424,648 in 2020 and $2,498,139 in 2021. Are there any questions? Member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Referring back to the Minister's contribution to the budget debate, she mentioned a new strategy of dealing with some of the criticism we get internationally through the movie industry. And she's embarking on a program which will try to change some of the perception of our financial services globally. Could she give us some information? Is this where some of the costs associated with this would be located?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, yes, this is the vote for the Department of Financial Services, and so a lot of the engagement strategies and the engagement activities would be conducted via this vote, as well as responding to the various international initiatives, assessments, etc. The intention of the move, I should say, or expanding our engagement program to include film executives or film producers and content providers more so than any, is to just make sure that the same kind of education strategy that we've embarked on with policymakers in Washington, D.C., policymakers in the EU, policymakers in the UK, that the benefit of having the information is made available to them as well. Ultimately, we know we can't control, just like you can't control the media, you can't control what is actually printed or produced, but what we found, and certainly what I found in having these direct engagement with a lot of the policymakers in these various countries, is if you have an opportunity to actually give them the facts, many of them are surprised because they just didn't know. Some of them are, kind of under the auspices of, or under the assumption that, the popular narrative still exists. Some of them know and they don't want to change their narrative, but, those aren't the ones that we actually are too concerned about changing hearts and minds. It's the people that really don't know because they've never been exposed to the facts. And so the purpose of having an engagement on an education strategy is to at least give people the information, give people the facts, so when they come to write the scripts, they'll at least have the information to hand and hopefully will pause before they make what they will now know as erroneous statements about the state of play, the regulatory framework, etc. of the islands.
So how much of this budget then, Mr. Chairman, it would be directly aimed at that effort? I'm assuming that we're going to continue the other efforts as well. So how much of this?
Mr. Chair, through you, a large part of the cost associated with this is already kind of embedded in the time, the staff time, the costs that we have associated with engaging various consultants or various advisors in this regard. So I've been advised by the chief officer that to be able to tease out the exact figure specific to this particular strategy would be quite difficult, but it is within the broader parameter of our engagement strategy globally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, and do we feel that this is going to be an effective strategy? In my mind, you're dealing with script writers and creative people who create imaginary scenarios. It's going to be hard to sort of impose on their ability to create and their artistic freedom and change their storylines, if you get what I'm saying. It's going to be difficult with an artistic person who's producing a dramatic piece or a thriller, whatever, to change that perspective that they may be writing about. Where did we get the I guess the support that this strategy would work versus going to the financial services players that are connected to the Cayman Islands, who have offices worldwide and who should be out there telling the good news about the Cayman Islands?
Mr. Chair, I want to thank the member for the question. I also want to pick up on the phrase that was used, and I intentionally tried to ensure that that wasn't what was communicated when we actually talk about the engagement. We're certainly not trying to impose any particular viewpoint on anybody, creative writers or otherwise. What we want to do is make sure that people have the information about the Cayman Islands. And so this strategy is ensuring that the popular culture influencers have the information that is based on fact. So when they create their stories, it's not just created based on a fiction or a narrative that they may be familiar with based on other creative developers, etc. We've also been engaging, I've been told by the chief officer that there's been discussions with DOT and other arms of government to ensure that when we raise the level and profile about the Cayman Islands, it's not simply a one-dimensional strategy either. It's to look at all that we have holistically to offer as a country and making that kind of information available. So with respect to what support, I mean, it's interesting that you've asked, because I know I floated the discussion since December 2017 with a number of people in the industry, and many of them were actually quite keen on seeing some sort of an engagement process happening with getting the information. Again, this is not a question of us going and trying to dictate to anybody. I certainly can't dictate to US policymakers, EU policymakers, or UK policymakers. But what I can do is to help provide information that when they go to have their discussions, they do so with at least having the information to hand. Whether they use the information or not, it's totally up to the individual. I also want to stress the point, as we all know here, all politics is local. And many of the same policymakers and players are influenced by their own, populations, their own people that are in their constituencies, so to speak, that influence their views about what they think is important. So in addition to doing exactly what the member has said about actually engaging with people in the financial services overseas in those, in the various markets or jurisdictions that we're looking to have an impact about the perception of Cayman, that is a strategy that we have already been working very closely with the industry here, the local financial services industry, in helping to provide avenues and access to them being able to engage with their counterparts. And actually, they have been doing, Cayman Finance has had a number of engagements in Europe with European counterparts, etc. So it's about broadening the strategy and making sure that we have, and we try to target as many audiences as we can, because it's one thing to say people that know us, love us, will use us. They will continue to do so, but it's making sure that people that don't know us and that are being influenced by information that may not necessarily be based on fact, we at least give them an opportunity, if they so decide, to, if not include us, to exclude references to Cayman, because even that in itself would be a win when you see efforts produced in 2019 that make it seem as if you can just call up the bank today and you have a bank account tomorrow. Those kind of throwaway references, as we know, is absolutely not factual, but I'm sure if we think about some of the popular narratives coming out, it still exists. Again, whether we can actually enforce, we can't force anybody to do anything, but I think people are, people would rather have the information to hand and then they can make that determination. But I think, as I said, based on the effectiveness of being able to see and hear some of the narratives changing amongst the policymakers by virtue of them actually having the information to hand, we're hoping that that same strategy will work to the extent that it can. But to be quite honest, I believe this is something, this kind of image and perception of Cayman, dealing with that and trying to put the facts out in a way that is accessible to the people, that strategy is long overdue, and we're just attempting to try to do just that.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, obviously the Minister's business is financial services, not movie making. So what resources, what partners are you going to be working with to ensure that you can reach the people that you need to reach?
Certainly, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, again, want to thank the member for his question. Just as we've partnered with a number of persons in the various jurisdictions in Washington, we have a firm that we work with that has very close ties and links and access to Capitol Hill. The intention is to source a similar type of entity, similar type of support before we embark. So I just want to make it very clear, this is not going to be, we approve the budget today and we're in Hollywood tomorrow. This is something that we realize that we need to think about how we influence the kind of popularization of Cayman today, given the facts of where we are with our regulatory framework versus what is something that is still based on the very popular but dated Hollywood image of Cayman in that regard.
Thank you. And one last question. I noticed the minister didn't mention the Cayman Islands Film Commission. I would have thought that would have been one of the first ports of call in order to get assistance in that area. As I said, financial services is the minister's business, not movie making.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the member for stressing that I certainly have no intention to be a filmmaker, nor am I qualified to do so. But I did mention that I would be, and we are engaging with the Department of Tourism and the Ministry of Tourism, and the Film Commission is under and working with the auspices in that regard. So Apologies if I didn't spell out the individual entities that we've been engaging with thus far, but that certainly is a part of the strategy, is looking holistically of the offerings that we have as the Cayman Islands to be able to make the greatest impact in the markets that we're looking to make.
Mr. Chair? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the Minister, I want to first congratulate the Minister and her department for being able to maneuver herself throughout the last few years of the pressures of the overseas to add these new regulations and so far doing such a good job to keep us off the blacklist. I recognize that there's a large substantial amount of money in this budget to implement necessary technology, structures, legislation and the like to make sure that these new regulations are in process. And it's costing a lot of money, rightfully so. But we can agree that just like how the government is increasing their costs to meet these pressured regulations, so will the financial services industry players. And one of my concerns, and I don't know if your department has investigated or prepared to look into it, but the potential negative effects on the industry of increasing expenses for them to also meet these regulations as well, and how that could potentially trickle down to the consumer, which is the individuals from abroad who register their companies, their funds, and the like. Has there been any analysis on the potential negative effects to the pricing scheme? We don't want to price ourselves out of the market, so to speak. And if so, is the government prepared to do any necessary reductions, but obviously at the same time securing the necessary funds to provide for our people? But in the event that those changes puts the expense on the industry so high that we become more expensive than any other industry player, like say for instance the Bahamas, Guernsey, and the like.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank first of all, thank the member for his congratulations and acknowledgement of all the hard work that myself and the team in the Ministry of Financial Services have done over the past 2.5 years to deal with all the numerous challenges that the industry faces and from the work of the ministry. So thank you, member from Georgetown Central. Also want to thank him for the question, because I think it's an important question. It's one of those where it's a balancing act. With everything, it's a balancing act. We try to approach, and certainly having a industry background myself helps to bring a particular perspective when we are talking about implementing new regulations and implementing what, in most cases, are externally driven global regulatory framework changes that we need to adapt to and we need to adopt. Because if we want to stay competitive in this industry and we want to stay relevant and also want to stay as seen as doing our part to fight the various financial crime related activities, money laundering, tax evasion, etc., we really have no choice but to do what we have to do to be able to continue to evolve and adapt. So that's certainly the position that this government has taken, and that's the position that I understand we need to continue to take to stay in this business, because it's a global business. We are, as I said before, we're small but we're Talawa, and we want to stay that way. But the point about being the cost, and of course there's always a cost implication, and that is certainly one of the messages when I meet with policymakers across the pond to say, listen, this is how certain things affect us as a small country, and you need to understand and appreciate that it's, you have millions of people to hand to be able to disperse certain of these fees. We don't. But at the same time, if we don't actually play ball in this global arena, then we will get shut out. And that in itself will have cost implications for government revenue and being able to support, obviously, all the expenses and expenditures that we were able to do in this budget. We, as a ministry, don't intend to increase, yes, and my very able chief officer is reminding me that a lot of these are international standards and other countries are also having to adapt. And so therefore the cost implications aren't just localized for us, but all of the jurisdictions that fall within our same bucket are having to experience the same changes. But we don't we also, whenever there's any new fees that are levied as a result of administrative costs that we have to incur as a government through implementing new technology and anything else, we try to be reasonable in our approach as to how we determine what the cost structure should be. I have personally, and as well as the ministry, certainly through the work of the Department of Financial Services, we have a very robust local engagement strategy as well, and we often, in most cases, have the kind of internal as well, internal to the ministry and government, but also we have consultation process with key members or key associations within the industry before we bring out any major regulatory changes. So we have the benefit of hearing and stress testing some of these things with industry before we bring legislation forward more generally. So that dialogue is very active. And so I have the benefit of at least hearing from industry in many of these regards before we move to implement anything.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the Minister for that the comprehensive response. I just suggest that we as a country and as a government keep a close eye on the pricing of other jurisdictions so we don't lose our little share of the market, because cost is very important. I want to move now to another area of presence. You know that much of the new legislation was talking about establishing what the definition of presence mean. And I express my concern of how that could potentially affect our economy by way of, does it mean that many of these companies will have to have a person here, and does that mean an influx of thousands of people or hundreds of people, and how that could potentially affect the housing market, all of these different ripple effects. Have we determined exactly what presence mean yet, and have we established what our game plan is in respect to how it affects us locally?
Mr. Chair, through you, again, thank the member for that question. I believe that the question emanates from the kind of adoption of the new economic substance regime. Again, that certainly is an international standard now that the jurisdictions like Cayman, or low tax jurisdictions, have all had to adopt. So we all have this regime in place now as per the OECD's Foreign and Harmful Tax Practices work. So the essence of presence goes to the heart of people, premises, and expenditure. We don't have, unlike some other jurisdictions, we have not adopted a bright line test to say you have to have X number of employees, X amount of expenditure, and X amount of physical structures. We've taken the kind of reasonableness test based on the level of activity, the type of activity, and certainly those discussions would be had within what, given the nature of the business that is conducted using Cayman structures, what is the kind of reasonable under that regard, but they would have to demonstrate on those concepts. There is the provision for allowing outsourcing in Cayman, which this is where the service providers come in. We already have a good cadre of service providers, and that's why we are seen as one of the preeminent financial services centers, because we have the expertise already locally. Whether there's going to be a need and an increase for those to happen, can't sit here and definitively say yes or no, but we've made as much provision to allow what pertains now to continue to happen in a way that is manageable and reasonable. And so that's the approach that the legislation has taken, as opposed to saying you must have X number of employees, X number of expenditure, or X number of buildings, because we understand we are a small country, and those are the considerations we had to take.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thanks again to the Minister. Just one last follow-up in respect to that area. So am I understanding that at this point our viewpoints is that we don't think we're going to have, from a physical perspective, a large influx of any kind of persons having to be here for the presence purposes. So therefore we don't need to be concerned about population effects, if I dare say. So are we saying that the predictions are we're not going to have a large influx? Because if there is, whatever the percentage may be, whether it's 2%, 10%, we as a government have to consider the ripple effects of that, and that's what I'm trying to focus on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. No, I understand what the member is getting at, and I mean, I wish I could sit here and to say with some, definitiveness with a crystal ball in hand to say this is going to create X percent increase in our population or X percent increase in our, need for infrastructure. We do appreciate that Cayman, we are in a very enviable position, compared to many of our competitors, and so it's seen as a very attractive jurisdiction to be in anyway. Even outside of the scope of economic substance, we've had a lot of interest and activity of people wanting to move and base here. Now, this may actually create more of an impetus for people to do so because they don't want to have to leave the jurisdiction, which is a good problem to have. It is, in some regards, an issue that we need to consider. It is certainly something that we as a government have been considering, and we need to make sure that we try to keep our finger on the pulse as to what's happening, and that's why the engagement with industry is absolutely critical, and we'll continue to have the kind of vital local engagement activities that we have working with the various associations, so we can kind of hear what is happening in the space and how we may need to make further adaptations to be able to accommodate any growth if it does come down to that.
Member for Bodden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the Honorable Minister. I think I just about almost wrap up season 3 of Billions, a Showtime movie that I've been watching on Netflix. And so far in the 3 seasons, and it's a very financial based series with the stock market and everything else. And so far I've only heard the Cayman Islands being called one time, which I considered something quite remarkable, and other places have been called many times. Knowing that this issue of, no press is bad press or whatever, or even bad press is good press, we also have to accept that part of our reputation that we have as a tax haven came as a result of how we marketed ourselves in the 80s. We went out and we literally told the world we're a tax haven, and that pretty much selected itself. But we told that story. The question is this: is it better for us to continue to tell our story, which we are more in charge of, as opposed to trying to tell other people how to tell our story about us? Because ultimately, we are in charge of our story. And I think the message is subtly getting through. If you even look in Hollywood right now, there's less references to the Cayman Islands, and I think that even that laundromat, that movie on Netflix, The Laundromat, has actually helped, where Panama got a lot of the hit, BVI got a lot of the hit, and I don't even remember Cayman once even being mentioned in The Laundromat, but Delaware, Nevada, and those places were mentioned. So there is already, we can see where the Cayman Islands being mentioned. So the question is, is it better for us to continue to push that narrative that we are story, because we can see where it's taking shape now, as opposed to try to add a different dimension or maybe lose focus? I mean, I'm trying to understand the thinking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the member for the question. I absolutely agree. The fact is we need to tell our story, but we need to tell the story. We need to shape the story that we want to have, but it needs to be shaped based on fact, right? And I think and if you look at the timeline that the ministry has produced, because we've been having these increased engagement meetings, seeing how we have adapted and evolved in our regulatory framework just within the last 20 years, much less going back to what we've been doing since the 80s, since the time of the MLAT. We are one of the most, in terms of our regulatory framework, we probably have a more robust framework than most, if not many, of our competitors. But that's not the story that we've been telling, to your point, for all these years. So I agree, we have to develop and craft and tell our story. But telling our story means telling our story. So I don't see it as being competitive. I see it as being complementary to what the member is trying to achieve, in the sense that we need to stop And where there are areas, and actually even as recent as, this week, we've seen and stuff has been brought to our attention where certain things have been emanating from our own, still trying to portray the image that was portrayed back in the 80s in 2019, where it completely had no basis of fact. We have to be more vigilant as a government, but also as an industry, to make sure that we don't continue to perpetuate the stereotypes and have the own goals in that regard. So I agree with the member. We need to tell our story in a way that is rooted in fact, but we need to look to the audiences that we may need to tell that story to see if there's a way to impact. On the point about laundromat, you're right, because Cayman, as a jurisdiction, didn't feature in the Panama Papers. And so therefore there was no need to put us in that if they were trying to base that on the Panama Papers. I actually was relieved when I looked at that too, and had a glass of wine to make sure that I was able to deal with what I thought may have been the onslaught. But the fact is, again, and this, Mr. Speaker, I don't, and of course this was picked up in the media, and because again, it sounds very exciting. This is but one small aspect of all of the work that the ministry is trying to do in terms of looking at possibly broadening the engagement base. Over the last 2.5 years, we have been doing exactly what the member from Bontown West has been saying. We need to tell our story. We've been out there actively engaging with audiences that may never have heard our story before, and hopefully that will, even if not consciously but subconsciously, help them to be able to either, the ones that we need to advocate for us, advocate, again, the policymakers that we need to engage with, or at least help them to have a basis of fact before they make determinations about regulations or laws that they think that can or can't or should be put in place to deal with jurisdictions like ours, as in their own view.
There was a video around maybe 2-3 years ago, could be less, that went viral in the UK, and it featured some guys going into the hospital and just start yanking away people medicine, their treatment. But the one thing that jumped out was it ended with a baby being in an incubator and then someone coming and basically like cut off the power to it. And the story that they were telling is that all of these services were being lost because of all of this tax evasion, tax avoidance, and they specifically went at the UK overseas territories and the likes and trying to push. And what I recognize from that video is that the process or the strategy being used has moved from the institutional level to almost to the social level. And what I've been looking for is the little 1-minute, 2-minute video that tells the Cayman story. One that could be done in a basement that costs a few $100 that we just send viral. I look at that Cayman Airways ad that when we did with the coming home with the jets. I mean, that went viral. I had people, friends in LA, send it to me and ask me, Chris, did you guys see this? Because I didn't have a little feeling about it. And the question is from a financial services standpoint, I mean, where is that little 1-minute, 2-minute video that fits on Instagram, that fits in social media, that just tells the Cayman story in a way that really gets it out there? And I think that's really, more of those is where we need to be looking at going.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I promise this wasn't a scripted debate before we came here, but I'm so glad that the member did ask that question, because that's exactly the kind of direction that the ministry has been given in terms of producing these little vignettes, the easily accessible, the easily digestible, the message in a way that resonates with not just the technocrats or the technical people or even the policymakers, but the average person who influences their policymakers by the kind of demands that they make or the perceptions that they portray. I'd just like to ask very briefly, just to give an overview to the House, what are some of the things that have already started and what are being planned with respect to addressing what the member has actually saying he would like to see going forward with respect to how we try to get our message out. So if I'd like to ask the Chief Officer to just give a brief overview of the activities to date and what is planned.
Can you please state your name and your position before for the record?
Good morning, Dax Basteo, Chief Officer, Minister of Financial Services and Home Affairs. Mr. Chairman, through you, thanking the member for that those questions. We certainly recognize a need to be much more engaged in terms of our communication, especially on social media. We spent a better part of this year involved in getting the research done, so we have very clear messages and the facts at hand to be then used in various campaigns. We have increased significantly our use of social media, more on Twitter, LinkedIn, and hopefully by the end of the year, a new website. And into the new year, in the next 2 years, we'll be seeing a lot more engagement through those means to make sure that our messages get out to not just the regular clients and partners we've used in the past, but to the broader audience through social media.
Mr. Chairman, through you to the Minister. In this financial services modern innovative framework, is there any punitive measures for the players in the financial industry who go rogue and cause the Cayman Islands to get a black eye, and then the government has to spend millions of dollars to recover? Because I can't recall anybody ever being prosecuted.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank the member for the question. That would be more under the kind of supervisory frameworks of when we get to the vote for SEMA and the ITC in terms of the enforcement arms of the aspect of financial services. This vote that we're on now deals primarily with the kind of policy advice, the engagement strategy, and responding to the international requests, etc.
But certainly one of the things that seems to weaken our position, although we have a huge regulatory framework, it is somewhat akin to our anti-corruption legislation. The international agencies doubt us because nobody is being prosecuted for anything. And what I want to find out is, what is the ministry's policy position to ensure that the people who break our regulatory framework is publicly prosecuted in this country, and we don't just take people money and defend the industry?
Mr. Chair, through you, the policy is we expect that the legislative framework will be adhered to, and if it's not adhered to, that the relevant agencies take whatever action that needs to be taken in order to ensure that there's adherence, be it, whatever the enforcement mechanism is for whatever the infraction is, because there's different tiers for different types of infractions. So essentially, to cut to the chase, the laws are there for a purpose. They should be enforced, and the agencies that are responsible for doing so, we work with them to make sure that we hear and make whatever amendments, give them additional resources if need be, in order for them to carry out the job that they need to do.
Member for Bodden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the Minister, and this is more a statement rather than a question. One of the things that has been a pet peeve of mine is this belief that all of this money is sitting in the Cayman Islands, when in fact, all of that money has been sitting in the banks in North America, Europe, and Asia via the old correspondence process. And the only money that's really here is the money that we have circulating and that we have sitting in our pockets. I would really and truly love to see that narrative being sold to the people overseas. The money isn't here. Stop looking for it. It's in the correspondent banks, and the information is there. And as long as people have this belief that the Cayman Islands sitting on billions and trillions of dollars, this is a small island, that narrative will continue. So I would hope when they're telling that story is to remind them that the money has never set foot in the Cayman Islands.
Member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one follow-up on the whole marketing strategy, because I've heard now a lot about the different strategies being employed to market and sort of control the narrative in our financial services. What are we using to gauge success of these campaigns? Have we implemented marketing campaign management software? Do we have a marketing team? How do we measure results and effectiveness of these campaigns, so that if we need to make adjustments and changes to the strategy, that we're informed by data and information?
Mr. Chair, I'll ask the chief officer to give some of the specifics as to what's done and being done and planned.
Mr. Chairman, through you, as we get into the details of developing those strategies, the measurement will be certainly a part of the process. We're doing that right now for some of the things we are doing from a communications standpoint. So we're very much aware that the need to measure success. It'll be part and parcel to the whole plan once it's rolled out.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, have we made provisions for the technology and the resources in this budget to be able to do that effectively? I'm talking about marketing software, that sort of stuff.
Mr. Chair, I'll ask the director of the Department of Financial Services, who kind of deal with this more on a day-to-day, to talk with a little bit more specifics to that question.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, everyone. Michelle Bahadur, Director, Department for Financial Services, Policy and Legislation. Mr. Chairman, through you, thank the member for his query, and we do engage overseas service providers similar to what we do in Washington, D.C. and London, who have the tools at hand that we can utilize to be able to carry out those types of surveys, whether it be it's post-campaign as well as pre-campaign as well as post-campaign, in order to gauge and determine the results of the campaign. So we're not developing those tools in-house. We're just using the services and tools that are we can achieve via our consultants and other agencies that we're working with.
No further question. All those in favor of FSC 21, Framework for a Modern Innovative Financial Services Industry, $2,424,648 in 2020 and $2,498,139 in 2021. Starting part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. FSC 22, a robust, efficient regime for the registration of corporate and vital information, $3,022,720 in 2020, $3,197,008 in 2021. Are there any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Member for Northside.
Mr. Chairman, through you to the Minister, I wonder if we can get an explanation for the increase of 700,000, because I know that a lot of people don't pay attention to the outputs and the quantity of outputs that are listed on these pages, but the public finance and management law require us to audit in relation to the outputs and how they're achieved. My concern here that most of the things listed here are down. Births and deaths and marriages is down. Companies registration is down about 25%. Partnership is down about 25%. Trust is down about 50%. Number of filing annual returns, changes, etc., is down by almost 30%. Are we expecting a downturn in the economy and all of these income sources are being reduced?
Mr. Chair, I'll ask the chief officer to deal with that question.
Mr. Chairman, there's an error on the plan and estimates in terms of quantities. The numbers, I believe, are correct in the budget statements, so there may be an issue of summation that needs to be addressed in terms of the numbers on this one FSC 22. In terms of the cost increase, That's being driven primarily by two things, one in terms of staff and the other in terms of systems. I think the registry has done a lot over the past few years to introduce online services and improve those services. And so a cost that has been going up as we increase the measures we're putting in place is for the system development and operating the systems. Also, in terms of being able to focus on customer service, we want to make sure that we have the teams in place that can address client concerns and to be responsive. And we are at the point where we're planning to increase the staff in the next 2 years.
So you're saying that the output figures are on this are wrong. Are they supposed to be above the 2019 figures that are here?
Mr. Chairman, yes, they should be higher. I'll have to calculate them to make sure that the numbers are right, but they're right in the other parts of the document and not on that one page.
If there are no other questions, all those in
So they're
favor?
wrong for both 20 and 21.
All
Yeah.
those, go ahead, sorry. All those in favor of FSC 22, a robust, efficient regime for the registration of corporate and vital information, $3,022,720 in 2020 and $3,197,008 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. FSC 23, International Cooperation in Tax Matters, $3,349,515 in 2020 and $3,575,597 in 2021. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, all in favor of FSC 30, FSC 23, International Cooperation in Tax Matters, for $3,349,515 in 2020 and $3,575,597 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, no. The ayes have it. FSC 31, Public Safety, Electronic Monitoring, and Incident Response. Oops, my apologies. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Mr. Chair, sorry, if I could crave your indulgence, since we're kind of keeping on financial services, if it's okay to do, if we've done with the financial services votes, if we can move to do SEMA? MOA, sorry, that would be MOA, sorry, MOA 1? Huh? Or even, we can start with AOA actually. AOA and then move down from there and then come back to the Home Affairs,
Okay.
if that is acceptable.
So you're asking for us to continue then to leave the FSC votes, remaining FSC votes, and go down to AOA 1?
Correct, Mr. Speaker, if that's acceptable.
I don't have a problem with that. So if we will postpone then any discussion of FSC 30 for the time being, and we'll move to AOA 1, Auditors Oversight Authority, $335,000 in 2020 and $340,000 in 2021. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, all those in favor of AOA 1, Auditors Oversight Authority, for $335,000 in 2020, $340,000 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. MOA 6, Regulation of the Cayman Islands Currency, $1,400,000 in 2020 and 2021. Are there any questions? Member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is primarily on the SEMA really, and I don't know if the minister's mindful to give us some specifics, not on currency transactions, but certainly, well, Mr. Chairman, I will listen to my colleagues and take the matter up on the MOA 12. But because it certainly would, it certainly has an effect. 12 and what we want to bring up, it also has an effect on the circulation of currencies and that kind of stuff. But all right, I'm sure we can ask that.
All in favor then of MOA 6, regulation of the Cayman Islands currency, $1,400,000 in 2020, $1,400,000 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. The ayes have it. MOA 8, collection of fees, $300,000 in 2020 and $300,000 in 2021. Are there any questions? All in favor of MOA 8, collection of fees, $300,000 in 2020 and $300,000 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. MOA 12, regulation of the financial services industry, $12,778,100 in 2020, $12,778,100 in 2021. Are there any questions? Member for East End.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, in the minister's contribution to the budget and address, she explained that in response to my contribution concerning the use of personal checks in this country as it relates to banks and how they are requiring that you pay a fee to change what is necessarily a note if you do not have an account at that bank. In effect, in our view, contrary to the exchange of bills law, that I think the minister explained, not in any detail, but that the government was currently working on that matter. I now invite her to explain to this country and this committee the details of how this, one, is considered not against the exchange of bills law. Two, what the government is doing to correct it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I think the member was very eager to hear my views on this, and he somehow imported that into my debate, but I actually didn't address this particular issue in my debate. But I'm certainly happy to do so now, Mr. Chair. The concern that was expressed by the member in April of this year, actually, prompted a discussion and therefore a response to the query to me from SEMA on this matter. And if I can just kind of briefly summarize the analysis taken by SEMA to determine the position that currently pertains. I also want to say that I have since sought the advice of the Attorney General with respect to the kind of analysis provided, and he has also concurred with the conclusion reached. So, in essence, the member in raising the concern back in April is correct that under the law, a bank must pay a person the sum payable on the check. However, the law on its face is silent on whether the bank can charge fees for cashing a check, and on that basis, a bank is not prohibited under the law as it currently stands from charging services related to check cashing. So that is the legal position that pertains with respect to the law in question. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think it is helpful that we understand and appreciate that practice is not unique to the Cayman Islands, and as explained to me by SEMA, is by way of reference to other jurisdictions in the context for the U.S., the U.S., for example, the issue was addressed by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or the OCC for short, on its website when it deals with answers about cashing checks. And that particular policy published by the OCC expressed that there is no federal law or regulation that requires national banks to cash checks for non-customers. Most banks have policies that allow check cashing services only for customers and who have an account with them in order to protect both themselves and their customers from forgeries. Now, a survey, Mr. Chair, of the banks, I guess, 20 banks in question, or a list of 20 banks that was published, or this information is available, indicates that a number of banks charge between $8 to $10 for cashing checks. Some of them have a amount threshold. So, for example, one of the banks charges $8 per check for checks that are greater than $50. Some just have an $8 blanket charge. Others have an $8 or $10 blanket charge, irrespective of the check amount. Another bank, again, has $10, but with a minimum of $50. Some of them have free for checks under $5,000. So it's a commercial decision that's taken by the individual banks. This is an example that was provided to me by what pertains in the U.S. So, in essence, the banks need to give you the face value of the check, but they also are not prohibited for charging for services related to check cashing, and that is what is the legal position that currently pertains in Cayman. And as I said, it is not something that is unique to Cayman, and I have a written example of what happens in the U.S. as an example of the practice more generally.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, for a second, let's go through this. This country, I don't know what obtains in America when it comes to their law. I don't know. I have not had the privilege of hearing this before, I would have done the research necessary. But the details of our exchange of bills law protects the bank against forgery. They can refuse to do it. It is very clear. There's no question about that. Now, Mr. Chairman, when a person develops a relationship with a bank and the bank offers a service to facilitate that individual entity or entity for them to better transact business within this community, other than using the legal tender, the currency of this country. They are going into an agreement, a private agreement, for a fee. And I have advanced this argument before, Mr. Chairman. Now, that fee and that service is the responsibility of the bank and the individual who does it. Then we turn to the law and it says you must pay face value. It further goes on to say it is not even the numbers that are written on it. It is the figures in writing that must be paid. Now, it is disturbing to hear that after that individual writes a check, then the recipient is also charged for that fee, another fee on top of that to change it. Something is radically wrong with that. For 1 minute, Mr. Chairman, let us assume that there are no checks in this country. Then we go back to 6, which is 6? Yes, which is the regulation of Cayman Islands currency. No matter how much we have as a currency circulation, it is going to quadruple or more if we don't have checks. So it's in the best interest of this country to promote the utilization of checks. Now, if that bank does not have the resources available, the financial resources for their commitment, then they shouldn't be issuing checks. Because once it says that you have to pay face value, you must have provisions for that. Are we saying, is the Attorney General saying that this is an added cost for them to do this transaction? Is that what we're saying? Is that what we're going to place upon the person whose name that check is written in? Because it doesn't make sense to put in the exchange of bills law that you must pay face value and then give them the authority to take monies out of that to be able to change it when you are surrendering it directly to the bank that it is drawn on. I understand if you are going to do it at your bank and that bank says to you, this is someone else's check, you're going to have to pay me a fee for all the troubles I have to go through to get it over to them, to verify that it's valid, that to verify that it is valid not only with signature but has the available cash for me to redeem. It just doesn't make sense that there is no exception. The law does not make the exception that they can't charge it. The law specifically says you have to pay face value. Are we making the rules?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and want to thank the member for the concern expressed. But as I said in explaining what the legal position that pertains here is, as well as what is seemingly the practice, not just here, but globally, with respect to check cashing for non-customers of the bank, is the member is correct. The law requires that the face value be paid, but the law does not prohibit the commercial practice of charging to cash checks for people that are not customers of the bank. That is the position that has been, as I said, the analysis provided to me by SEMA, and that has been agreed to as in the legal position that currently pertains in the Cayman Islands by the Attorney General. Now, again, people have multiple views on this particular practice, but I am here to tell you that that is charging non-customers for transactions is not illegal, and the policy basis, as I read out based on the OCC's FAQ, is essentially to protect their customer base.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to prolong this. I think I've argued long enough over the years about this same thing, and in particular in more recent times. We know how lawyer opinions are. You go to another one, they got to tell you what I'm saying. You go to another one, it's a completely different thing. Maybe we need to get a few of those. Mr. Chairman, the minister is saying that it's not unique to Cayman. I know we don't have to reinvent the wheel in many instances, but the law, while the law does not prohibit them expressly, prohibit them, it does by saying that you have to pay face value. Now, what a world we would have if the government, your good self, sir, you're responsible for the issuance of checks, whether you do it or not, and they got your electronic signature. Is government only transacting business with people who have accounts at Royal Bank? What a world we would be in. What a country we would be in. Then we are going to have to walk around with wads of $100 bills in our pocket. Some of us do. I can't do that. And I'm sure there are many who can't as well. And the ease of transactions, payment transactions with a checking account is in the interest of the economy of this country. And we're getting legal opinions saying that the law does not expressly say that they can't do it, but the law expressly says you got to pay face value. That's what the law says. No, I don't have the law in front of me.
Mr. Chair, I think it would be helpful to ask the managing director of SEMA to assist possibly with the member in the queries that he's expressing.
And while she's doing that, since she controls, that's why I wanted to do that currency control, can the bank then take $10 out of my cash that I have received from someone when I go to exchange that for a deposit? I'm going to deposit it. That is legal tender, that is face value, the Queen is on it, if that's the face you're looking for. Can they now take that out too, because that is financial transactions?
Cindy Scotland, Managing Director of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. Mr. Chair, through you, to the Leader of the Opposition. I don't disagree with some of what you've said. The difference is you're saying that they're not paying face value. They are paying face value. What they're saying to you is, I'm going to cash this check for you, which is for $100, but there's a fee of $5. Now, you can either, I give you the $100 in one hand and you give me the $5 in another hand, you're still getting face value. It has nothing to do with them not paying the value of the check, right? It's a commercial aspect. In terms of with the deposit of currency, I am not aware of any bank charging for anyone to do a deposit, particularly on whether it's cash or check. There's no fee attached to that. I am no lawyer, but I would venture to say to you that no, I don't think that they would take $10 out of a deposit of cash or checks. It wouldn't be to their advantage to do so. So the issue, sir, sorry, isn't whether they're not paying face value. The issue here, as we see it, is that the law doesn't say they cannot charge that fee. So if you want to prevent that, then the law must be amended to explicitly state that the fee cannot be charged, that they cannot charge a fee. Otherwise, they are paying you face value. They're just simply saying, you have to pay me a fee in which to do it. Now, whether they take it from the amount they're giving you by agreement, because if I go to the bank and they say, Mrs. Scotland, I'm only going to give you back $95 because there's a $5 fee, I have a choice at that point. Either I'm going to take it and go up to my bank and deposit it and wait, or I'm going to say, well, okay, take the $5 out of it. So there's an agreement between the two of us before the money is exchanged.
May I, Mrs. Chairman, ask Mrs. Scotland then to, in her professional opinion, should that fee not be, or that transaction fee, the person who opens that account, should that person not be made aware of that at the time of opening that account, that we will charge, in addition to charging you for a transaction that you make with this checkbook, you have to pay government fee, I think it's 50 cents now, taxes, 50, 25, whatever. And then, whoever you write a check to, I'm going to charge them to. Should they not be notified of that? Informed of that?
Mr. Chair, through you, I would say yes, but if the banks do publish their fees, but whether they should explicitly say to them if I open a business account, should they say to me, Cindy, for every check you write, I'm going to charge the person who cashes it? Is that a concern of mine as the person issuing the check? It depends. Some people will pay the check and not worry whether you cash it or deposit it. If there are others who, if I'm continually paying the same people and they come back and say, Mrs. Scotland, I no longer want your check because every time I go I lose $5 on it, or I have to pay $5 to cash it, then I may say, well, okay, I need to have a word with the bank. But whether they tell them that at the time of account opening, I am not clear, but there's certainly the banks publish their fees.
Two things. In those published fees that you are regulator for, have you ever seen them say that they're going to charge someone who is not within their circle, ring fenced in by virtue of having an account there? Have you ever seen that? Number two, what role does the regulator yourself play in all of this?
Mr. Chair, through you, I'll take the last question first. We don't play a role. We have no control over the fees that the bank set. In terms of, I'm not sure if I understood the first question, in terms of whether there's...
Have you seen them expressing it in their published fees that they're going to charge someone with a check that doesn't have an account?
Well, it says check cashing and then there's a fee.
And Mr. Chair,
But is that
just to add to the point about the disclosure. So this government recognizing the issue of, trying to make the transparency about check cashing fee as accessible as possible, the SEMA was asked to do a compiled and quarterly publication and have been doing so since, I believe, 2017? Since November or something. So they've been doing on a quarterly basis. So instead of having to troll between each bank, what is the check cashing fee, individuals can determine by going to SEMA's website to see what are those check cashing and other kind of main transaction related fees in a way to promote the transparency, to your point about knowledge and information accessibility to people about what these fees pertain. So SEMA does produce that on a quarterly basis, and that's uploaded in their respective site.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect to the Minister, I'm not here advocating for somebody who owns some big business, I'm here talking about that person who is working for minimum wage. That's the one I'm talking about. And they don't have any concern about go and see how much they're going to charge. They just want their little money so they can go supermarket, Foster's or Coconut, go get their thing, and they go into the bank. Those are the people I'm talking about. However, maybe I'm pressing this too far because it's obvious that no one is enforcing the exchange of bills law.
No, Mr. Chair, I believe it's important to set the record straight about what the law does or does not allow. And as I said, the law, as the director has expressly about the exchange, you can give you the 100 on one hand and say, but you need to give me 5 back because this is the fee that I charge for this service as a non-customer. That is what the state of the law is right now. Now, whether or not we have to talk about whether there should or shouldn't be changes to the legal framework, that's a different discussion. But to say that with respect to banks charging non-customers to cash their checks, that is not illegal per se because they have the ability to make those commercial decisions. And I just gave that contextual because, again, the world of banking and financial services is not just localized to Cayman, but wanted to give the picture that this practice of charging non-customers for cashing checks is not unique to Cayman, and it's very prevalent in the US, and I'm sure other jurisdictions, if SEMA were charged to do the research to determine that position.
Mr. Chairman, the Minister didn't make me finish. I was going to say the same thing, that fees then, banking fees are not regulated by anyone either. Therefore, is it not time that we look at the business of banking in this country and put the responsibility squarely on SEMA or someone else's shoulder as to what can be charged and where it can be charged and what for?
I think that's a question of the idea of price controls generally, because that's essentially what the member is asking, whether or not there is an ability or whether the government should implement price control for any services rendered or otherwise. So it's a broader discussion that needs to happen. It's in the context of this particular case that you're raising, but it is a broader discussion about whether or not the policy should be to implement these type of controls as a philosophical decision that the government should or shouldn't make.
Mr. Chairman, God forbid, I don't involve myself in price controls. I know how convoluted and complicated that can be. Price control would mean you could tell the bank that when someone opens a checking account, you can't charge them more than this or that or whatever to run that checking account. I am not talking about that. I am saying that if the bigger picture is, if you are running that service, then you can't get double whammy out of it, i.e. from the person who you've got the relationship with and then the person who the check is written to as well. That's what I'm saying. That is the control that we need to put in place.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Member for
through you,
Georgetown
Mr. Chair, to
Central.
the Minister, I want to state that I disagree with her interpretation about the price control matter, because we're not talking about average goods and services. We're talking about legal tender, which goes under a totally different category altogether. So we can regulate that. And I understand that the interpretation is that they're allowed to charge, but is this something that the government would support a legal change in, regardless of what the practice is overseas? The effect of this is hurting the small common man. Now, I would suggest that, what would the minister say to a single mother who's going to pick up a child support check from the courthouse that has to take out $10 out of $150 in the cost of living today, unless it's something they continue to promote?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also like to respectfully disagree with the member's analysis of legal tender versus goods and services. The legal tender, as we've explained, is what it is, and the bank is required to pay legal tender. They're not required to provide a service to a non-customer. And that is what is that's the heart of the discussion that we're having right now. So it's still a service, and so it still relates to the whole price control discussion. But be that as it may, I think, again, I'm not saying that that's a discussion that we shouldn't, as a country, as a government, as a legislative assembly, have or not have. What I would say in direct response to that question is, in order to avoid having to pay for a service at an institution where you don't have a relationship with, go to your financial institution where you do have a relationship, and that bank, that would avoid that particular payment.
And
but
what
again,
about those who don't have a bank account?
But again, it's not, and I don't want anybody to sit here and think that myself as minister or this government is not concerned about the issues that are being expressed. What I am saying is, this is the legal position that stands right now. And for them to say that it's not being enforced is not correct, because SEMA doesn't have the ability to do anything with respect to a commercial decision as this. This is a wider discussion that we would have to have as a government to bring forward any change or not to the position that pertains today. So that's my response to whether or not the government would support this. This is a discussion that we would have to have in order to be able to make a policy determination as a government on that regard.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing back from the minister in respect to her discussions with her cabinet and her backbenchers, and come back to this honorable house and then tell this honorable house to tell the public what they intend to do. But in the interim, many of the checks that we're talking about usually is through government checks. Can there be a policy decision that checks coming from government be mindful of that fee and do some countermeasure to either include that fee on there or cash the checks at the government building themselves, so persons that don't have bank accounts do not lose that money? Because I know you're referring to, well, they can go to their own banking company and not lose that money. But there are still Caymanians here today that don't have an account anywhere else. So they automatically will lose that money. So are we considering them? And if so, would the government consider cashing the checks themselves so we don't have that problem?
Mr. Speaker, I will defer to the Ministry of Finance on that particular one with respect to government checks, because that is under the purview of public finances and that in that scope.
Mr. Chair, is she suggesting that you should answer the question now, sir?
Not one I think I am prepared to give an answer for, but I mean, just my immediate thought would be if government were to venture down that way, it would take a lot of effort and resources, because you would end up with a department or within the government handling very significant amounts of cash. It would take some time to I think, to develop the program and put something like that in place. It's my gut feeling says not impossible, but does require a lot of thought and effort to put everything in place. Member for North Island.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, before you move on that vein, can the government at least look at just defending or protecting the payments of child support that is processed by the courts? Because some of those checks are weekly, and for them to be paying $10 weekly for 52 times a year, that's over $520. And when you have to take care of a young child, that's a lot of money. At least if you can do that for the child support checks.
What I would say, sir, is that we are going back to talk with the bank with regard to this practice, with regard to the catching of government checks and taking this $10 out. Is that we are going to have discussions with them on this matter.
Mr. Chairman, that's what I was going to suggest, is that certainly the volume of business that government does with, I think, is Royal Bank, you're in a position to negotiate with the bank to say, when somebody brings in a government check here, if you want to keep this government account, you shall not charge the $10 to cash the check. Otherwise, I'll move the whole account to a bank that will agree to that. Certainly the government is in a position to not negotiate that, but based on the volume of business, demand it on behalf of the most vulnerable in our society.
And I think that our caucus does support that. And
You gave us this commitment 2 years ago, sir, that you were going to talk to them and see something about it. So let's get it done now before Christmas, so they don't lose out of their Christmas money.
Member for Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I think both sides of this honorable house is cognizant and indeed sympathetic of the hardship financially and otherwise it's caused to those who would fall through the financial social stratification with the unnecessary, and that's my respective view, almost draconian approach that these banks are taking. I can speak from a personal perspective, but I choose not to do it in this forum. The legal position is a legal position because that's what the current law says, and I think that perhaps the minister may want to actively consider bringing a caucus paper for caucus to consider amending the law as it would best reflect from a holistic perspective. I believe that Cayman is a well-regulated jurisdiction. We're very competitive. We have a global reputation, and we should no longer be worried. And when I say we, I speak from a pluralistic perspective, whether we're going to lose a bank from that. Certainly, I'm happy that I'm not Minister of Finance because I don't have as much patience as you, because I would have put all of government loans, accounts out for bid and find a competitive and favorable and Caymanian interested financial institution. I would also ask that consideration be looked at to see whether there are any legal impediments for institutions such as credit union, because if they are willing, I would certainly encourage and support the accounts going there so that our people would not have to suffer anymore at the P&L of persons who have not yet found their domicile in Cayman based on choice.
Member for Bodden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, sir, to the Minister. And I have here a statement from Jamaica National Bank that was sent to one of their customers. And I'm just going to read out just roughly, then the question will follow. A payment of $3,900.06 was made. Only $333.82 went towards the loan. A total of $7,013 was made. Only $1,179.05 went towards the loan. Total payments of $14,620.13 was made. Only $1,461.22 went towards the loan. A total of $18,100.12 was made over a period of time. Only $2,162.76 of that amount went towards the loan. A total of $15,013 was made. Only $1,971.21 went towards the loan. A total of $18,900.12 was made. Only $2,198.55 went towards the loan. In summary, Mr. Chairman, a total of $77,520.06 was made over a period of time, and of which only $9,306 of that amount and 61 cents, or 12%, went towards the loan. But of that amount, $9,285.17 went towards service and late fees, and $12,963.55 went towards peril insurance. The question in all of this, Mr. Chairman, through you to the Minister, what do we need to do within our own laws to ensure that no Caymanian is taking advantage of this kind of situation in any situation? We accept that people will fall behind in expenses. We accept things will happen. But you can't have a situation where a person can actually pay over $77,000 and only $9,300 of it goes towards a loan. This is madness. And if this House can't do something about this happening to Caymanians, then we need to really rethink what it is that we're here for. This can't continue. And the question to the Minister is, what are we going to do, or what is it that we can do now to ensure that institutions such as Jamaica National do not continue to prey on Caymanians? And there are other institutions too, but this one is just the one that seems to be the order of the day right now.
Mr. Chair, through you, it's hard for me to comment on that particular case, given the details. Obviously, I don't know that case, so just want to make that very clear, the individual that you referred to or the information you provided. But in terms of the interest, how much goes to interest, how much goes to principal, it's hard to comment because it all depends on at what stage payments are being made. As we know, when you take out a mortgage initially, the first 10 years or however long your mortgage is, the vast majority of it does go to interest, and then it goes to pay off the principal. So I'm actually not sure, Mr. Chair, what exactly I'm being asked to comment or commit to at this stage in this regard.
Mr. Chairman, this issue was raised already by me in a speech when we brought something, I think it was on the Building Society. The Minister gave me a commitment then that she would have looked into it. And so I'm pretty much at a loss. So what I was really looking for was an update in terms of this issue that we had asked about.
Okay, so now there's a little bit more clarity as to the case. So, Mr. Chair, through you, the same commitment that I gave to the member, I immediately in turn forwarded that information and that request to SEMA to look into the matter. Unfortunately, they cannot speak to that case because that's the nature of the job that they have and the responsibilities that they have as regulator is to investigate, but not necessarily come and report in a public forum as to what is happening. So I can speak categorically that the issue raised by the member was taken forward with the regulator upon my commitment and his request. It is now with SEMA, and I think that's as much as we can say to that matter currently.
Well, Mr. Chairman, through you, then it goes towards the second question. What is it that we can do, or what is it that we need to do to ensure that this practice doesn't continue, for that anyone else has to go through this? So what is there, if there's a law that we need to change, I see where the Honorable Minister of Education mentioned a caucus paper to deal with the banking fees. Can we ask then that maybe a caucus paper be developed to also look at this, but this can't continue?
Mr. Speaker, the matter needs to be looked into, first of all, and that's exactly what SEMA has been charged to do. I have just had sight, without the specific details, as to what is transpiring, has transpired, but certainly I even have an individual name in it. So the matter is being taken forward. So the commitment that I gave has been followed through. What we're doing as a government is, as these concerns are expressed, we will continue to move these things along, and I can commit that I will have a discussion with the government of which I'm a part. I'm one member of the government bench that is sitting over here, and we will have this discussion more broadly about the issue of fees for non-customers. That I can commit to having.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I guess, to close this issue up and just to put a little bit of timeline. This property has 4 rental units with it, so it is income producing. The owner is a 67-year-old woman, and she's on the verge of being out on the road for Christmas. So rather than have her then at NAU, where she has an income producing property that literally can help her and also service her loan, what it is that we can do to make sure she stays in her home for the Christmas.
Member for Northside.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister and to the Director of SEMA. Does the Minister or SEMA consider it any kind of conflict that banks who are offering mortgages are also what my grandfather would call corn swabbling their clients to take out life insurance with them and property insurance? Because I have a case in my constituency where a person has made every payment on time for 5 years, but she still owes more than she borrowed. Because every year the bank is allowed to finance the health insurance, to finance the property insurance, and add it to the principal of the loan. How do we regulate an industry that has that kind of stuff going on in it?
Mr. Chair, through you, not sure to the member about the case, but certainly I would look into that matter and report back through the minister.
Forget about the case. Do you regard it as a conflict for a bank that is offering a client a mortgage and is insisting that the client take out life insurance and property insurance with them on an annual basis, the cost of which they add to the principal?
Mr. Chair, again through you, if as you describe it is the way that it's done, then my answer would be yes. But based on my knowledge, that is not the way it's done. And that's why I said I would have to look into the case that you're referring to. The banks themselves don't sell the insurance. When you get a mortgage, you're required to buy insurance to go with it. There are some banks that I believe negotiate better rates to different insurance companies to offer their customers. Whether you pay for that for me is something that I have to agree to. The bank wouldn't just pay it. So that's why I'm saying that I would have to look into your particular case, because that doesn't sound right.
But consider the David and Goliath relationship. You are trying to get a mortgage to buy a house to put your family in, and the bank is telling you that I can provide the life insurance, I can provide the property insurance. And most cases, I would hazard a guess, given the bank's propensity for profit, is that they are also profiting on the insurance, although they may be buying it from somebody else. And I would think that the bank should be prohibited from offering that client insurance.
Mr. Chairman, just to shed some light, because I have a mortgage and I've had one all my life, my adult life. In years past, I could get my insurance. I had my personal insurance. I do now as well. The last time I had to remortgage, the bank offered me a company that they had a group insurance, they had organized a group insurance with, which I got at a better rate. And it's just as Cindy in Scotland has explained. They get it, they offer it to you as a client. You don't have to take it because you can deny it if you want to, but they offered me a group rate. And my son, the same thing. And although I have private insurance as other insurance, I took that one as well because the rate was good. It's the same on the house insurance. On my house insurance, it's the same thing. They have a company, organized a company. You can take it or you can reject it because there's nothing to force you to take it. But as I said, I had a better rate.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Member for Newlands, you've been waiting.
Mr. Chairman, I've been listening closely, and for about 6+ years I've been listening to this scenario play out. There is a legal principle, a legal right that is available in countries, jurisdictions where you have mortgage legislation called equity of redemption, which is essentially your right as a mortgagor to redeem your property after you've paid off the principal and interest on your loan. We don't have that right here. That right protects individuals who have a mortgage from the bank or any lending institution taking any unscrupulous or unethical action that would prevent them from being able to successfully pay off their mortgage. You got to remember, when someone applies to the bank for a mortgage, they're at a complete disadvantage. The bank calls the shots. If you can't accept their terms, you don't get your money. So these people are basically at the mercy of the banks. We need to equalize that playing field so that the person borrowing the money has rights too, and we don't have that. So until we have mortgage legislation on the books passed by this legislature, this problem is going to continue forever. Yep. And we're going to sit here for another 6 years and still be talking about this and arguing about it. Yep. Pass the legislation. Simple.
Yep.
All in favor of MOA 12?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I thought my colleague was requesting an answer, but if he was just making
there was
a statement.
no question. There was a strong statement.
Fair enough,
If you
Mr.
have
Chair.
questions,
Yes, sir.
then please signify.
Thank
I
you,
recognize
Mr.
you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the Minister, in respect to this mortgage concern that has been raised in the line of questioning, can we get an update on the mortgage reform bill, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that was a topic that I did address in my contribution, but I'm happy to remind the member that the government, as eager as the opposition, has been awaiting some legislative proposals to be brought to this House. Certainly as minister and on behalf of the government, we are eagerly awaiting the recommendations of the Law Reform Commission, who we have asked in their purview to do an analysis of the mortgage situation, the mortgage legislation. We have to remember that when you go to take a mortgage, just as you, as the member indicated, you are asking to borrow money. You are asking, if you had the money, you wouldn't have to ask to borrow the money, correct? So by virtue of asking to borrow money, there is a differential power dynamic. We just need to accept that's being the facts. But not only that, the bank is lending you somebody else's money. So there has to be protection for that other person who has their money in the bank as well, because otherwise the whole relationship breaks down. So the matter is not as simple as saying, pass the legislation. We have to look and see exactly what our legal framework pertains currently, and then figure out what's the best way to protect you as a borrower, but also me as a lender, because the bank is lending my money, or whomever's money is invested in that bank. So that's the reality that we need to make sure is not lost in all of this discussion. So as I indicated during my debate, and I mean this because as the issue was raised in 2017 by myself as minister, saying we would be looking to get this kind of analysis done so we can bring forward legislation that doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because remember now, we need to have the money in circulation to be able to lend. And we need to have people that still feel that they will get a return on their investment, so to speak, being the banks. So it's a very complex situation. It's not as simple as saying we need to just have the pendulum on one side and forget about the other equation. And I hope that brought it home, because you as a lender, meaning as a depositor in that bank, you need to know that you're going to make good on when you want to draw that money out as well. So what I'm here to say is the government is looking forward to, and perhaps when the AG is able to speak and in his contribution, he can talk about where we're at with that process. But I understand the Law Reform Commission is still in train to come forward to the government with this legislative proposals for our consideration.
Member for Northside.
Mr. Chair, I have a question on the insurance law. I think it was sometime last year the Public Accounts Committee had an opportunity to look at the published profit for various entities like health insurance companies and property insurance companies. If I recall, the property insurance people were making in the range of 15 plus profit a year net. Does the law in its present state allow the supervisors, SEMA, to do any kind of economic analysis and compare rates? Because I happen to know that my friend who lives in an island just like I do, which has been hit more frequently in the last 20 years by hurricanes than we have, is actually paying less per thousand to insure his house. And some time ago, I had brought a motion asking the government to look at the property insurance rates in the local market and see if they were in line with the stuff. Does the law allow that?
Mr. Chair, through you, just to make sure I understand, the question was whether we do an analysis of the rates. And the answer to that is no. I don't think there's anything prohibiting us from doing it, but I'd have to check. But it wouldn't be something that we would customarily do.
Mr. Chair, through you, can I ask the minister to give a broad outline of what the purpose of the Law Reform Commission is?
Mr. Chair, I would respectfully ask the member to put that question forward to the Attorney General, as that is a function of his office.
Mr. Chair, in dealing with the banks and mortgage structure, is it not the minister's responsibility to create the legislation necessary rather than passing the buck to the Law Reform Commission?
Mr. Chair, as I indicated when we first had this discussion, the legislation governing what we commonly refer to as mortgages cuts across many ministries, including the Ministry of Lands and other ministries. So that is why it is prudent and practical for this government to take a holistic view as opposed to just taking a piecemeal approach of the legislation that falls squarely within the purview of Ministry of Financial Services that may miss the bigger picture that needs to be considered, and hence the Law Reform Commission, in their role to do just that, was engaged.
Mr. Chair, through you, Mr. Chair, to the minister, that's based on a request from the government for them to do the investigation about what necessary changes we need to fix this problem, as opposed to the government making their own analysis and suggesting bill changes. Am I correct?
That is part of the analysis process. That is part of making sure the government has information to hand to make an informed decision.
Can the minister then say, in wrapping up, when can we expect legislation to be suggested for this Honorable House to consider?
As soon as we get a report as well as legislative recommendations for our consideration, I will certainly bring that forward to my government caucus for consideration.
Can the minister give an estimated time of when the public can expect that?
As I indicated before, any questions about the process and the timing of LRC would need to be put to the Attorney General, as he has carriage of when and how that process continues. As I've said on a number of occasions, when we get the recommendations, I will certainly bring that as a matter of priority forward. That is what I can commit to. Until I get the recommendations, there's nothing for us to be able to have a meaningful discussion on, looking across what pertains currently.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can the minister give what was the last indication of timeline from that commission?
It is currently in train.
So through you, Mr. Chair, is the minister saying that she doesn't even have an idea, even if it was a previous timeline, have no idea when the bill is going to come?
Mr. Speaker, English is my primary language, and I thought I've made very clear. The timeline is not something that I can control. We did what we intended to do, which was to bring forward the issue, and we will continue to do. Every commitment that I've given to this House has been carried through.
Mr. Chair, I'm trying not to be a difficult person here, but this is the minister who is in charge with the regulatory bodies that govern the banks. She just admitted that she has initiated this reform to be triggered and investigated of what we need to do. And now she is saying that she doesn't even have an idea of timeline for this country to consider of when this change is going to come? Is that what I
Mr. Chair,
understand?
through you, with all the melodrama, with all of the passion, let me help the member understand what we are. I have been saying, if I could speak Spanish fluently, I would say it in a different language, because clearly English is a bit of a struggle today. What I have said, and I have been consistent, what I have said, I didn't say who was a difficulty for, I just said it was difficult. What I have said is we are moving with as much alacrity as we can to get an overview of what should pertain given our legislative framework. I don't have carriage of the registered land law. I don't have carriage of any other pieces of legislation. So for the member to assert that somehow I am to pull this out of a hat because I have responsibility.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not
Mr. Chair, let me finish. Let me finish. We as a government are committed to looking at this issue. Hence, we wouldn't be having this discussion if we weren't, right? So let's give credit where it's due in that sense, yeah? The point is, I have asked the Attorney General up until most recently, can you give me a timeline? And I have not received one, okay?
Mr. Chairman, through you, just, I guess, to collapse this issue, I'm just trying to understand the process here, is that the changes that we need to make within the law to protect Caymanians, we are waiting on the members of the Law Reform Commission to bring that legislation here so we as legislators can pass it. So the question is, I'm trying to understand what policies or what thing is going to surround the law, because I'm looking here at the Law Reform Commission law, and within it, it basically says the functions of the commission are to study and keep under constant review the statutes and other laws comprising laws of the Cayman Islands with a view of a systematic development and reform. So it appears that the law has to be there first for them to basically act on it. So I'm trying to understand when or where, who's ultimately responsible for the primary legislation for them to review.
Mr. Chair, that was precisely the point, because we don't have a neatly packaged mortgage law like other jurisdictions. Our regime that we commonly refer to as mortgages is governed by multiple pieces of legislation that currently pertains. Because I certainly am not a mortgage expert, it was incumbent upon myself and the government to get the kind of analysis about which pieces of legislation are actually relevant to governing this commonly referred to notion as mortgages. Once we have the analysis, then we're able to make an informed decision about what policy decisions should be taken. That's the point, and I don't understand how it's so difficult. I know this is an emotional issue because it touches the heart of people, homes and livelihoods, but please understand, this government is, for the first time, you might have been talking about it for 6 years, this is the first time the government has taken forward this issue to actually look at what can be done.
Mr. Chairman.
We need to do so from a perspective of information.
Mr. Chairman, I need to understand from the minister if there's a committee or somebody working on this. And the reason I'm asking this is that one of the very first piece of legislation I brought that I withdrawn on the commitment of the government was changes to the registered land law would at least give some protection. I met with the minister, I met with the premier, I met with other members, and we were basically told to be looking at it. That was over 2 years ago. So I'm trying to understand where we are, because people are still losing their homes and still being ripped off by entities like Jamaica National in this country. So what I don't want is another committee, because we are the one tasked inside here to bring the legislation to get it done. So we need to know who's working on it so it can be done.
Mr. Chair, I once again, for the fourth time, because I gave the overview during my speech last week. The member was present, I believe, when I gave the update November last year. And shortly after the update, the Law Reform Commission published its report. They were in the process, and they currently are, according to the Attorney General, they're currently in the process of getting feedback on that report. Now, if the member was as passionate and as concerned, and I'm not saying he's not, but I would hope that by now he would have fed his concerns into the Law Reform Commission, who is the exact committee that you're calling for as who's to deal with this. If you have not, I would encourage you to send your comments through to the Law Reform Commission to be built into that consideration pack. You want to know who's dealing with it? As I've said time and time again, the matter is being analyzed, recommendations are being put forward, and it's not the first time. The trust bill that we just recently amended, the major overhaul of our trust legislation, that was informed by the work of the Law Reform Commission. So this is not a new process, this is not a new concept. Many of you have been in this house much longer than I have. For the new ones, I'll forgive you if you don't know the process. It's a learning curve. But we are carrying out exactly what we said we were going to do. And I would encourage the member, if you have yet to have your input included, or you want to wait until it actually comes to the House to have it debated, that is entirely within your purview. But
Mr.
we are
Chairman,
moving on this issue.
One last question,
Sorry.
and then we're going to
Mr.
close
Chairman,
it off.
through you, respectfully, this is the same process that the Consumer Protection Bill has taken, and it's already came and still can't get anywhere with it. So after it's been sitting there now, 3-4 years on the Consumer Protection Law and still nothing, this clearly the process isn't working, and that's what we need to start fixing, is the process.
Mr. Chair, there is a correction that needs to be made. As far as I understand, there's a slight difference, because we actually actively, as a government, initiated this particular process. We actively said, and asked them and sought, Law Reform Commission, as you rightly, they can take matters onto themselves to do, because they have the role of looking at reform generally, and they have that own right and purview. They also, at the request of the government, can take action forward. This is one of those where it was requested by the government, so therefore I will certainly make sure, I will keep a keen eye as and when that report is available with recommendations. I will look forward to taking that to my colleagues for further consideration, policy decision, and legislation thereafter.
Mr. Chairman, I suggest that the manifestos be updated then to say when we need to do stuff is the Law Reform Commission job to get it done.
Member for Northside.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm a little concerned. I have always understood that legislation is driven by the government being made aware of an issue. The government determines what the solution to that issue is. The government makes a policy position based on its informed position on the issue and a solution to the issue. That policy that the government decides is then presented to the legal drafting department with a set of drafting instructions of what the policy is supposed to represent. And the legal drafting department produces the legislation which government either accepts or rejects, and then it is brought to this parliament after it's approved.
Mr. Chairman, the member, first, good morning. No, afternoon now. The member is absolutely right. The benefit of a law reform commission, which is why it was created, is that it has resources available to do the necessary research and analysis and make essentially what it produces is a report. It doesn't produce legislation, it produces a report which guides the government in determining what the legislation should look like.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Premier, the government has taken a policy position which it has presented to the Law Reform Commission, on which it is doing a report on how best to implement or to legalize that policy position.
Mr. Chair, we have asked, and maybe I want to thank the Premier to essentially reiterate what I've been saying all along. We have asked the Law Reform Commission to provide us with the analysis of the situation that pertains today. So we are able to take an informed position, as the member expressed, in making our policy decision based on the factual legal landscape that cuts across several ministries and several departments to determine what should be the way forward to address these concerns. The legislation will be brought forward by the relevant minister, depending on if the recommendation is to go one way or the other, depending again on what the report with its recommendations say. So we have done exactly what the member, and thank you for so succinctly giving the overview of what the role of what our role is and what we are doing. This is exactly what we've done. But as the Premier said, the benefit of utilizing the auspices of the Law Reform Commission is the resources that they have to do that kind of overview of the macro view, as opposed to just one ministry's purview of the legislation pertaining to that individual ministry. So we are anxiously awaiting that report.
All those in favor of MOA 12?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chair,
I would put it to the vote.
I had questions in an entirely different area.
Can it be asked in another vote? Or?
No, it would have to be under this one.
All right, then let's go ahead and
Relevant.
proceed, because I'd like to take the lunch break too.
So would I, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
One of the minister could tell us what's the overall staff total at SEMA, and how many Caymanians, how many people on work permit?
Mr. Chair, I will ask the director to provide that information at the operational level.
And I'll just say, Mr. Chairman, why I'm asking this here is I'd requested it a couple of weeks ago, I think, the same information, but I didn't get, the response I got is that I would get a response through the minister. I haven't received that, so I said I'd raise it here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just recently, while we were in this budget debate in Finance Committee, had been made aware of that PQ, so I knew that we were going to have this exchange, so that's why.
Mr. Chair, through you, there are currently 214 persons employed by the authority, of which 173 are Caymanians. And 81%.
Okay. And as I said, I stand to be corrected, but I have been receiving reports that we are employing Caymanians on temporary contracts versus full-time employment. And we may be doing that for a number of reasons. But at the same time, individuals are feeling that they are being put on temporary contracts while we are bringing in people on work permit who are equally qualified. So I just need to, if that is the case, understand why that is happening, if it is happening. As I said, I'm just going by hearsay at this point, but I've heard it enough times now that I was asked to raise it by constituents.
Mr. Chair, through you, for the last 2 years, SEMA has been hiring what we call project assistants. And we will never have the number of resources that we need, and so there are always things that we're trying to catch up with. And so what we have done is that we have defined certain projects where we can bring people in to do those projects, and then the contract is finished. A lot of those tend to be interns. Some of them are people who are unemployed, and some are people who are retired that just looking to make some extra money. There's a combination in terms of they apply, they go through the interview process, and they're offered a contract. Most contracts are three months. Some are extended if the project goes longer. But when the project is finished, the contract ends. That is quite different than me hiring for a full-time employee, for which we do advertise, which project assistants are free to apply for. That doesn't mean that they will get the job. Okay, there's no connection between the two. They're entirely different things. Before the Public Authorities Law came into effect, we used to have a situation where if there was a project assistant who was an excellent performer, who added a lot of value, and for which we had an opening that we felt they could fill, they got full-time work. Now, as it stands, we can't do that type of transfer under the Public Authorities Law. We would have to advertise the post, which means once you advertise it, you're looking at a whole different pool of people. So I'm not sure who has said, I know of one particular case that someone has spoken to you, but I think they're being a bit disingenuous in terms of how they're explaining it to you. There is no connection between those project assistants, which are, like I said, are very specific jobs, and that of just hiring for a longer term contract.
No, just to clarify, the one individual I know that you know who I'm talking about, that wasn't the only person that's spoken to me about this issue. But the issue is, the bigger concern is that we are hiring Caymanians on short-term contracts, but at the same time we're bringing in people. And in some of those instances, the people on short-term contract have the same skills and qualifications or thereabout that they could be put into full-time employment. So the perception is that we're giving the Caymanians the crumbs, the short-term contracts, but we continue to bring in people on work permit.
Mr. Chair, again through you, I'm truly disappointed because I actually thought we were helping people by doing the short-term contracts, but like I said again, there's nothing preventing those individuals from applying for a job. But I would say to you that there is no way that we would possibly bring someone in for a job if there is a Caymanian who has applied with equal qualifications. It is the best person for the job, and if they are similarly qualified, experienced, the Caymanian would always be given preference. And that is why today we stand at 81% Caymanian. That's not by default, it is by design. I don't think we will ever get to 100% because you must bear in mind that when SEMA recruits, we're looking for people with regulatory experience. You can only find those here if they already work with us, right? And we tend to train them to a certain stage, and then the industry takes them. This year I hired 29 and I lost 32. That's just how it goes, because once you train them up, they become attractive to the industry. But they will never certainly under my watch, be an instance where there would be a blatant disregard for a Caymanian who's qualified not being given the job. Now, it depends on who you speak to, because everyone has a different view on what transpired and why they didn't get it. But certainly from our perspective, with our own internal policies, with the legislation under which we operate, and I'll also remind the Honourable House that we also have to apply for work permits.
Member for Bodden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, first of all, I really want to state for record my appreciation for the management and the staff at SEMA. I have been involved in industries now where I've continuously, for more than a decade, been regulated by SEMA and deal with them almost on a weekly basis in one way or the other. And I can honestly say that they do well by Caymanians and they have built that reputation. What I would like to ask through you, and this is something that people may not like, but here's the reality. The salaries that SEMA is paying their employees in the industry that they're in, it is unrealistic because it is a very competitive industry for talent. And as the managing director said a while ago, SEMA becomes a training ground, and then they can go into the private sector or into industry rather and make 2-3 times the salary. If people believe that money is being paid at SEMA or money is being paid in here, I can tell you compared to the industry, it ain't nothing. So the question I want to have to the minister is, one, is there any salary reviews being done? Because what we can't afford, especially in this day and age, is to keep spending money on training budget and then losing them because of salary purposes. What flexibility or what it is that we can do to ensure that we retain, attract and retain Caymanian talent within the regulatory industry? Or any incentives that we can add?
Mr. Chair, through you, I want to thank the member for the question. I've been reliably informed that there was a salary review that was conducted and approved, obviously by the board at SEMA in 2016. Of course, this is a discussion that we will continue to have with SEMA to ensure that they are properly resourced to the best extent possible. We've, as you see, this budget, we have, given an injection to SEMA based on requests that we received as to their needs. So it's certainly not a question of the government not supporting SEMA to get the resources that they need. But I think the issue being, people being, for lack of a better word, poached from a regulator, as that's a scenario that happens in many jurisdictions as well. And it's a testament, obviously, to SEMA's training and SEMA's, ability to upskill people, but people being what they are, people wanting to, look for other career opportunities. It's a hard thing to not necessarily say that people would, or I guess to say attrition is not uncommon in this industry, but at the same time, we will obviously work with SEMA to make sure that the concerns that they've expressed is something that we can work with.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. One of the things I just want to, and I know that there's a culture where people have a tendency of looking at salaries and income in the SAGC and complaining that they're too high. And I hold the view, and I can tell you from experience, the issue isn't the SAGCs are being paid too much. The issue also is that the civil service is actually being paid too little, and that's why I'm happy that the government is doing what they can in terms of moving the salaries up for public servants. But ultimately, what people need to understand where SEMA is concerned, we're talking about an entity that regulates over $2 billion of our GDP and defends a financial industry that's valued at over $4 trillion. So this isn't lightweight, and people need to understand that at the end of the day, we're still a financial services-driven economy, but financial services employ less than 9% of our population. So it is we need to make sure we go our steps to really defend that organization.
Member from East End, you have a lot of questions.
No, I just wanted a comment based on longevity.
Okay, because I'd like to take the vote on this and then...
it's on this, though.
Okay, fair enough.
Mr. Chairman, I have vivid memories of being here with the Premier and the Minister of Education and the Speaker and my good friend from Savannah when OECD applied ratios on us. You remember that? for SEMA, for regulatory, and they wanted 300-400 people working in there. And and this was in the mid-2000s, somewhere between 2000 and 2005. And I recall the Premier and I bringing that same question up about retention and where we were going to get all these people to regulate. Minister of Education, you remember that? And SEMA wanted to apply, not SEMA, OECD, were applying this ratio compared, IMF, compared with how many registered companies versus how many staff that had to be there. And the agreement was that we would build it up slowly, but based on the net value of your employees, the net amount of your employees you're hiring some and losing more, I don't think we'll ever reach their quota. But certainly, if a lot of people say that money is not a factor and happiness on the job, they're wrong. And certainly, I would think that you think people go and work for nothing, or what they consider nothing, or especially when they can see other opportunities after having been trained. And it's a revolving door, really. And we have been trying to reach the 400, I think it was 300 and something, 400 people that they needed, and we still haven't reached there. So hopefully we'll reach that point and one day and retain our people.
All in favor of MOA 12, regulation of the financial services industry, for $12,778,100 in 2020, $12,778,100 in 2021, starting part of the schedule to the bill. Please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Ayes have it. If I could have an indication whether I can just take the vote for MOA 13, or do you have questions? Okay. All in favor of MOA 13, assistance to overseas regulatory authorities, $980,000 in 2020 and $980,000 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill. Please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. The ayes have it. Colleagues, this is a very convenient place for us to take the lunch break.
Mr. Chair, can we continue just MOA 14 and 25 unless there's any?
Thank you. All those in favor of MOA 14, Policy Advice and Ministerial Services, $875,000 in 2020 and $875,000 in 2021. MOA 25, Monitor Compliance with the Anti-Money Laundering Regulations, $6,807,000 in 2020 and $8,807,000 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill. Please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. The ayes have it. Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Chair, before we break for the lunch, I'd just like to thank very much the members of the ministries, financial services team and machinery. I didn't get a chance to do that before. That's Department of Financial Services and the DITC and General Registry for their support. Also like to thank the Director of SEMA and her staff for being here and answering what were some very robust questions. And also like to thank my colleagues in the opposite or across the aisle for the spirited discussion. I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, that the public gets to know exactly what the government is doing, and obviously through those questions they were able to hear that. So thank you all so far.
It is now 20 minutes to 1. We will return after the lunch break at 1:45. That is 1:45. So we have an hour and 5 minutes for a break. Thank you.